Hey everyone, welcome back to our last day of the first week of Wrapped in Grace, the birth story that changes everything. We're going to talk about Joseph today, and do you just love it when you read something in the Bible, a story that's been so familiar, and you see something that you hadn't seen before? That's what happened to me when I was in the library one day getting ready to write this little piece on Joseph. I think I'd never really noticed that the Bible doesn't tell us anything he ever said, but everything he did was so significant, and he was so sensitive to God's leading in his own life and in his family. And I love that about him, actually. I love that God put that family together that way. A mom who was willing to say yes, and a dad who was sensitive to God's leading, and it really got them where they were supposed to go. This is called Joseph's Faith to Say Yes to Scandal, Surrogacy, and 46 Weeks of Celibacy. Mary's faith to say yes to God gets more attention than Joseph's. Joseph does not have any "I am the Lord's servant" verses. As a matter of fact, the Gospels do not record any of Joseph's words. What we know is not what he said, but what he did. When Joseph first learned of Mary's pregnancy, his plan for what to do next emerged from a God-fearing heart. Because Joseph, her husband, was faithful to the law and yet did not want to expose her to public disgrace, he had in mind to divorce her quietly. Matthew 1:19. Engagement in first century Israel involved a legal contract, so breaking an engagement was considered a divorce. Joseph loved God's law, and he loved Mary. He didn't want to make a big scene. Joseph would dissolve the legal terms of their engagement discreetly in order to spare Mary the public disgrace that would follow news of her illegitimate pregnancy. Joseph's strategy was to settle things quietly. God was about to ask him to live out loud. When the angel spoke to him in a dream, God asked Joseph to say yes to public scandal, to take the heat for something he hadn't even done. God asked him to say yes to surrogacy. His wife would carry someone else's baby, a child who would grow up under his guardianship. Joseph was a man of noble character. His record was untarnished. People wouldn't think so anymore. They would talk. Yet for Joseph, God's story was much more important than his own reputation. He did not even need a day to think about it. When Joseph woke up, he did what the angel of the Lord had commanded him and took Mary home as his wife. But he did not consummate their marriage until she gave birth to a son, and he gave him the name Jesus. Matthew 1:24-25. This private guy, who would have been content to live his life under the radar, said a resounding yes to his place in God's story. He said yes to scandal, yes to surrogacy, and if you count the 40 weeks of a normal pregnancy, plus 40 more days before Mary's purification at the temple, he said yes to almost 46 weeks of celibacy. No wonder God chose him. Joseph, I want you to do something for me. It will wreck your reputation. You will have to lay aside your desire for your wife for a while. But it is time for the next chapter in my story, and I have a role for you. I am coming there to save my people from their sins, and I'd like to grow up at your house. Are you in? He was. What a guy, right? I love that he responded, not only this first time to the angel in Matthew chapter 1, but 3 more times in Matthew chapter 2. Let me just give you those references so you can look at them today. In Matthew 2:11, after the wise men left and went home another way, God came to Joseph and said, you need to take Mary and the baby and go to Israel and go to Egypt and stay there until I tell you to come back. And it says, so he got up and took the child and his mother during the night and left for Egypt. He didn't even wait till it was morning, like absolute immediate obedience. And then down in chapter 2, verse 19, after Herod died, an angel came and said, okay, you can get up and go back to Israel. And he did it. And then a couple verses later in verse 22, they moved to Nazareth. This family was led by a dad who was sensitive to God's leading and immediately obeyed to make sure that the child that God gave him to care for was doing exactly what God had him to do. I love that about Joseph. It's been so fun to spend this week with you. I will start in week 2 next, in the next couple of days. You'll be able to find it here wherever you're listening. And we're going to talk about the birth announcement. And it's really where the title Wrapped in Grace came from. It's an incredible story of how Christmas really, really was birthed in grace from an ugly story in the Old Testament, but God showed up anyways. So I'm excited to see you back here. I hope you have some restful days and are enjoying your families during this season, and I will see you next time.